sorry, one second. Make accessible to the public materials and knowledge to support and promote understanding of LGBTQ history, culture, and arts in all their diversity. Our operations are centered around 2 sites, the GLBT Historical Society Museum, which is located since 2011 in the Castro neighborhood, and the Dr. John P. DiCecco Archives and Research Center in the Mid-Market. And although our physical locations are currently closed because of the pandemic, please check out our growing array of exhibitions, events, and archival resources at our website at glbthistory.org. I also want to thank all of our members and donors who make our work possible. And if you're not already a card-carrying member of the GLBT Historical Society, please consider joining today. Members get a variety of cool perks, including a 20% discount on purchases of things in our online store, which is a useful way to help support us while our doors are closed. And now I would like to pass it off to Katie Connery, who is the executive director of the Tenderloin Museum, who is our co-presenter tonight.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. For those that don't know, the Tenderloin Museum opened in 2015 with the mission of uncovering the lost history of the Tenderloin, as well as celebrating the vibrant present-day community. And we do that through historical exhibitions, art shows, walking tours, and community events. And hands down, one of the coolest things we've ever done is produce a play about the Compton's Cafeteria Riot, which premiered originally in 2018. And Colette Legrand, Donna Persona, and Mark Nasser were the play's author. Susan Stryker was an official advisor, and Shane Zaldivar was one of our ensemble cast members. I think you can probably guess which role she played if you are on gallery view right now. So we're very fortunate to have you all on the panel this evening. It's really lovely to see you all again. And I hope we can all get together in person sometime soon when it's safe. The modern LGBTQ civil rights movement began in San Francisco's Tenderloin, and that is really a cornerstone of the Tenderloin Museum's permanent exhibition and public programming, and a history that we're very proud to showcase. And we've been fortunate enough to partner with Shane, Donna, Colette, Susan many times in the past. And it's been an honor to collaborate with the GLBT Historical Society as well. So without further ado, we are going to watch Susan Stryker and Victor Silverman's seminal film, Screaming Queens, The Riot at Compton's Cafeteria. And please be sure to stick around for the post-film discussion.
This is Gay San Francisco, an inside look at the life of San Francisco's homosexuals. They number 90,000 at least, according to police department figures. They work to conceal their sexual orientation by day, and only at night do they show their true colors. The city's downtown Tenderloin district is the home ground of the always visible segment of the city's homosexuals and transvestites. The drag queens are here at Turk and Taylor. So frequent were the fights between screaming queens in the 2 to 3 a.m. period that police, even in permissive San Francisco, had had enough and asked an all-night cafeteria to close by midnight.
What really happened that night at Compton's Cafeteria has been all but forgotten. It wasn't a catfight between screaming queens. It was a riot, and it kicked off a new movement for human rights.
We had to fight for our rights as not gay people, but as human beings.
We fought for one cause. The cause that we fought for was for individual rights for freedom.
The 1969 Stonewall riots in New York have been remembered as the beginnings of gay militancy. But 3 years earlier, On a hot August night in 1966, dozens of drag queens and gay hustlers made history by fighting for their right simply to gather at a San Francisco restaurant called Gene Compton's Cafeteria. That story has never been told, until now.
Compton's Cafeteria was this hangout. It would be open all night.
You can go to Compton's and it was its own little fairyland. I remember the waitresses with the little doily napkins on their chest. It was beautiful because it was clean.
In the back of my mind, I remember when hell was raised, Compton's was certainly one of the sources.
Everybody would die for window seats just to show off.
Jehovah's Witnesses used to drag crosses down the street in front of Compton's and tell us we were going to burn in hell, but we ignored them. Compton's was fabulous. It was like Oz, something like the Wizard of Oz.
When I first came across the story of the riot at Compton's, I had no idea how deeply it would affect my life. I had recently finished my PhD in history, come out as transsexual, and started my transition from man to woman, all in the same year. I felt alone at first and really hungry for a community. Researching transgender history helped me find that sense of belonging. In 1995, I stumbled upon a document in the archives of the Gay and Lesbian Historical Society that described an event I'd never even heard of, the riot at Compton's Cafeteria. The story had been written down several years after the fact, and I wasn't sure if it was accurate or even true. But if it was, that riot might represent the transgender community's debut on the stage of American political history. I tried every way I could to verify that story. I scoured the archives looking for clues, and I searched the streets of the Tenderloin for people who might remember what happened that night.
It was a weekend night, I believe.
When I finally pulled it all together, the story was even bigger than I imagined.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to see the results of a 6-month psychological project, a research project that took us all over the country. In my office today, I'm Jay Martin. We have 4 contestants in a recent beauty contest. Now, for reasons which will become very clear, we're going to use first names only. The reason for using first names only for these very, very charming contestants is that right now, each one of them is breaking the law. The contest in which they were runners-up was a masquerade. Actually, in the vernacular, it's called a drag ball.
It was a party time. It was before the war really got started. There was so many nightclubs and bars and everything. It was quite festive. It was like Camelot back then. It was still wonderful. There was so many beautiful people that came through there that, you know, you just met people from all over the world. We had Hell's Angels that came in, and they would line their bikes up and down the street and party with the girls. And we used to have the most beautiful boys come to see us, just to party with us. And there was really no sex involved. We just partied, you know. And then, of course, there was sex involved sometimes. Then a lot of people were out walking around in the Tenderloin, just walking, looking around, because Compton was the place, one of the places to be. And we had quite a time in Compton's. It was a meeting place, like I said, a watering hole for people. It was open all night.
Compton's was a well-established local restaurant chain with several San Francisco locations.
Compton's Cafeteria was this place that had been around for years, I don't know how long, but was fairly reasonably priced food and a variety of food.
I would get like a poached egg on toast or and juice and bacon strips for $1.99.
It wasn't a big place. I don't know how many people it seated, but 50 or 60, something like that.
This was the front here. These stores were set back in here, so you had to go through in here to get into Compton's. Everybody that lived in the Tenderloin ate at Compton's, you know, and it was just packed.
I would not have gone to Compton's. The lights were very bright, I think. I think that they were those neon things, you know, those fluorescent lights. Very bad on makeup.
Boy, I wouldn't have wanted to run that coffee shop, I'll tell you. Somebody'd come in and they'd buy a cup of coffee. They'd spend hours sitting in this coffee shop waiting for their friends to come in and talk with them. And
every time the door opened, everybody looked to see who was coming. Because you know, as soon as that door opened, everybody wanted to parade their fashion.
It was a delightful time. It's like a fairy tale that you wouldn't believe, but there's the nightmare of the truth of it all.
Now, Simone, you openly admit that you're a homosexual. What do your parents think about this?
Well, I think my parents really don't know. You could say I live a double life, that on weekends I dress up like a girl, and then when I come home on Sunday afternoons or so, I look like a normal boy in the neighborhood.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have an older brother.
Does he know that you're homosexual?
No.
What do you think he'd do if he found out?
Probably kill me.
Back in 1965 and 66, that year that I was in San Francisco, I didn't know the word transgender at that time. So in terms of having any kind of helpful concepts or understanding, there wasn't much there. It was just that some like to dress as women and others don't. And some are even interested in enhancing their breasts and taking hormones and so on to try to be more as a woman. And my encounters with them were just as I would with anybody. You know, here's another child of God, someone to listen to, talk to, and without any judgment, just listen to their stories and let them tell me what they were experiencing.
Every great city of the world seems to have an area given over to the fleshly needs of men. In San Francisco, this area is called the Tenderloin. It is a marketplace of vice, degradation, and human misery.
I looked up the word tenderloin in the dictionary, and the first definition was familiar, a prime cut of meat. But the second definition surprised me, a vice-ridden district controlled by corrupt policemen. That's exactly how it was in San Francisco. The Tenderloin looked lawless and out of control. But the police actually ran the place. They allowed the prostitution, drug dealing, and gambling, and then demanded payoffs from people involved in those activities.
Well, the police came to Finocchio's nightly. I don't know for sure that there was like payola or whatever that was, but they were certainly well welcomed and well taken care of.
Finocchio's began in the 1920s as an illegal Tenderloin speakeasy. The club moved up to North Beach when Prohibition ended, but its backstage connections with the old Tenderloin vice racket were kept very much intact.
We were allowed to work because of Mr. Finocchio's association with the police. You knew not to take risk, not to offend.
Quite frankly, I never made a gratuity in the police department, but I was aware that some people did. Since I didn't give it to them and they didn't spend it on me, I'm not sure that it happened. but I can say that having been a policeman for 26 years, I could certainly understand some of it.
The Tenderloin was widely known as the place to go for sex, drugs, and late-night fun. While others came and went with relative ease, transgender people lacked the freedom to leave.
Police would give the people who were of indeterminate gender the message that they belonged pretty much in the Tenderloin, which at the time was kind of a gay ghetto, a very slummy gay ghetto.
I think transsexuals find the Tenderloin more acceptable simply because they're more acceptable in the Tenderloin.
Why are they more acceptable in the Tenderloin?
Well, because they're amidst their own kind, I guess.
The Tenderloin was populated by the pimps and the whores and the drug addicts and the drag queens, and yes, that element. And I felt very comfortable there.
Turk Street was our street, and the buildings that were on it, the hotels, that's where we lived. That was our home. We had no other place to go. Other hotels wouldn't rent to the queens, the drag queens, or the transsexuals or transvestites. So that was basically why we were put down in the Tenderloin.
You know, if you come around on this side of the building and you look up, you can still see right there, El Rosa Hotel, 166 Turk Street.
The El Rosa was like a wayward home for girls. There were so many of us that was there that our families had disowned us.
This is the place where Amanda was the mother queen.
I managed it at night. We allowed the girls to bring in one guest a night for $5. And of course, after Mama De La Rosa, she was the owner, would go to bed, I'd let them bring in several more so we could make a little extra money. It was a wonderful place. We spent our holidays together there. We became each other's family. We held on to each other.
There was a beauty shop that was over there where all the girls got their hair done, where that Club 65 is next to it.
The place that's the novelties and gift store?
Right. Yeah, that was the Chuckers, and this was the Rossi's here on the corner, which was a transsexual bar. And of course, on this corner, over here we have where Gene Compton's was. And it was a magnificent cafeteria. It was a great time.
Compton's was a great place to meet because it was like centralized. Right next door was the bathhouse for the gay men, and it was convenient to the corner. If you wanted to have a drink at the corner bar, you could. Or you could tiptoe down to Woolworth's and get more eyelashes.
There were tables of drag queens, female impersonators, transgenders, hustlers.
It had been a place where people had gone after the bars had closed, and it was a hotbed of prostitution.
Most of the transsexuals were prostitutes because they didn't have jobs. There was no way to get jobs then.
See, it was very popular because we worked all the streets from here all the way down, down to Leavenworth.
Yeah.
We never did work. None of the girls worked past Leavenworth.
Yeah,
but then worked Turk, Eddie, Ellis, O'Farrell.
And Mason, back this way.
And Mason, up to Mason. Never past Powell Street.
Any on Market? Or was that more like gay male hustling?
Never, no TGs hustled on Market Street. That was off limits.
As for me and other girls, we never thought of looking for a job because maybe in back of our heads we knew that they wouldn't hire us anywhere. Only the pretty girls that were entertainers or something like that. Most of the girls that were female impersonators were like in another level from the gutter girls that we were. They were earning a living and they were snobs.
I had the freedom to be a big sissy on stage, yes, but I did not have the freedom to live my life outside or off of stage. Had I not been born with the face, and I had great legs, and could sing a bit, dance a bit. All of those attributes that were such an embarrassment when I was growing up. You're too pretty to be a boy, the complexion, all of those things that I hated so as a child saved me. That's exactly what saved me. Or I'm sure that, yeah, I'd have been selling my ass on Turk Street, saving those pennies and looking for a John to take me through it.
I went out and tried to get a job in men's clothing. No, you're too effeminate, you're a faggot, you're a sissy, you're this, you're that. So I said, well, groovy. So I put on the clothes I usually wear, which is girls' clothes. I went out and tried to get a job as a woman. Yes. This doesn't work. You get a job, you work for a day or two, a week, a month, or whatever it boils down. Somebody comes along that recognizes you, who prefers to be a hooker and a tramp, turns around and turns your name into the boss and says, like, so-and-so is such and such, and that's the end of that job. So finally you reach a point where you get disgusted with the whole damn bit, and what you do is you turn around and you go out on the street. And you find out that you can make $100 a night, and you say, well, the hell with it. Why should I be legitimate? Why should I be respectable? Why should I be anything?
We sold ourselves because we needed to make a living, but we sold ourselves because we wanted to be loved.
I remember having a conversation with a hustler, a queen hustler dressed in drag, saying that some of their customers assume they're a female instead of a male. They would risk violence. I mean, somebody in fact would become violent with them, and there was this fear that would be the reaction of somebody.
It was dangerous, dressing up like a girl and still having men's parts there. It was dangerous for all of us. Some girls were getting beaten up for being men. Some girls have been killed for being men.
The threat of violent death was very real. I discovered newspaper stories about a serial killer who targeted transgender women in the Tenderloin. This guy did more than just kill his victims. He would slit their throats, ritualistically mutilate their genitals, and then dump their bodies in an alley.
You'd hear about murders, or you'd know somebody, but still, the next night, you didn't care. You had to make your money. I think going with a trick, the first 5 minutes with them is the scariest. Because you don't know if you're going to go to jail or if someone's going to pull a knife or a gun on you. That's why a lot of the girls were taking drugs, so they can work the streets.
We just lived from day to day and met our needs from day to day. You did what you did to survive.
We always had to load our handbags up. I'd drink a pint or a half pint of Southern Comfort and put the empty bottle in my bag. When people got out of line, we'd crack it over their head. And if that didn't put them down, then we took off our high heels. Because if they were gonna mess with us, we weren't gonna let people hurt us. And especially these girls that had their faces pumped up with silicone, if you touch their face and try to hurt their face, they'll kill you.
You had to be either able to kick ass or get your ass kicked. If somebody was on your turf, you just lay them out and keep walking and keep your eye on your back. That's how it was in the Tenderloin. You had to be that way.
Compton's was one of the few places in the neighborhood to get away from the constant violence.
Basically, we went there to gossip about what we did and to let people know that we were alive. We survived the night.
Sadly, even there, the Queens were not completely safe.
We got harassed quite a bit by the police in Compton. So a lot of times they would come in and just pick us up if we were eating for no reason and put us in jail for female impersonation. I had one policeman that hated me with a passion. Every time he seen me, he says, "Get in the paddy wagon." I said, "I just had my hamburger." He says, "Eat it Monday when you get out."
The police were out to get us.
The police were very, very bad. You could be taken to jail at any time, at any second, for no reason at all.
If we had lipstick on, if we had mascara on, or if our hair was too long, we had to put it under a cap. If the buttons was on the wrong side, like a blouse, they would take you to jail because they felt that it was female impersonation.
It wasn't too many years ago when I went to the grocery store once and got thrown into jail for being a female impersonator. And I've never felt as though I were impersonating female. I felt I am a female.
As is typical for most of us that are middle class, white men or women in our culture today that look fairly usual, we don't get treated by the police this way. So it's sort of like it goes, right past us and we don't see it. But those who are on the streets, who dress different, act different, in this case it was the drag queen kind of crowd, they were very aware that they seemed to be targeted.
First night I got in San Francisco, I was taken and arrested for one of those famous crimes, obstructing the sidewalk, which was my introduction to the infamous Tax Squad, which was a roving band of thug cops which patrolled the various and sundry neighborhoods in San Francisco and generally made life unpleasant for people who didn't particularly fit their definition of what a decent human being was. And I was one of these people who looked so in between that the police were provoked by my being.
I don't remember policemen being that obnoxious. That doesn't mean they weren't. It means I don't remember them being that obnoxious.
They would drive us all around North Beach, all around the Tenderloin before they'd even take us to jail. Then they'd strip us when they got us in the drunk tank for they'd search for drugs. And it was a little embarrassing being in full drag. You were isolated on a tier with other transsexuals. You had no contact with any of the other prisoners on the outside. We were in lockdown most of the time. And it wasn't that I had done anything wrong, it was female impersonation. I wasn't bothering anybody. But I was dressing as a woman the way I feel, so they put me in jail, shaved my head, or I refused to let them shave my head, and they put me in the hole, in lockup. One girl was in there 60 days in the hole because she wouldn't let them cut their hair. That's how important it was to us back then. They were, it was like they were trying to humiliate us, that we weren't human beings, so they should humiliate us.
The war in Vietnam shaped everything that happened in the 1960s, and it changed American culture in some unexpected ways. Gender itself became a form of politics. Long hair and love beads were signs that said a man opposed the war, while a woman wearing blue jeans was making a feminist manifesto. Challenging traditional gender launched a social revolution that would give Tenderloin Queens new ammunition to fight the discrimination they faced. Discrimination that deepened as the war in Vietnam progressed.
It changed quite a bit once the war started, and they started shipping a lot of young men through here. We partied with those boys that went off to Vietnam. Met a lot of soldiers that came through here, and they left San Francisco with a smile on their face, believe me. They had a good time, and we showed it to them.
I decided to do my country by being a hoe and giving it away to our servicemen, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor.
Wartime is always a boom time for prostitution. As soldiers and sailors descended on the Tenderloin, police crackdowns intensified, especially at drag queen hangouts along Turk Street, at places like Rossi's and the Chuckers Club.
They had a sign up over that said, "Enter at your own risk. This establishment is due to be raided at any time."
I remember when the cops used to go in the bar and say, you, and you, come with us.
As police raids escalated along with the war, life in the Tenderloin became even worse. Urban planners and developers intent on remaking the city tore down nearby neighborhoods where Black and working class people lived, turning the Tenderloin into the last pocket of affordable housing in the central city. New people moving in squeezed the queens out of the neighborhood's cheapest rooms, leaving them literally no place else to go. Just then, the queens found a new hope in a totally unexpected development: the sudden availability of a transsexual identity. That changed everything.
I come from a, rather small town, a gold mining community, in fact, and it was a place where boys had to be boys because that's all there was for boys to become as boys.
All this agony and all this pain, all the shit that I have been going through, I finally put a name to it, where I knew where I was going. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew that this is what I wanted to be.
I found out about the word transsexual by reading things about Christine Jorgensen. She was a high celebrity, so everyone could relate to her.
Christine Jorgensen was the first famous American transsexual. She made headlines in 1952 when she had genital conversion surgery in Denmark. Transsexual operations had been carried out in Europe since the 1930s, but most American doctors considered the procedures unethical and refused to perform them. That began to change a month before the Compton riot, when a San Francisco medical reformer published a path-breaking book.
Dr. Harry Benjamin wrote a book called The Transsexual Phenomenon, which was published in 1966, I believe.
Harry Benjamin, doctor, he gave hormones to everybody.
Oh, Harry Benjamin was a delightful little gentleman, and his book, The Transsexual Phenomenon, was like a guidebook for us.
Benjamin believed a person's gender identity could not be changed, but their bodily sex could. As a result of his work, the first surgical sex reassignment clinic in America would open on the East Coast later that year. Many drag queens in the Tenderloin began to envision a new life for themselves, one that fit better with who they thought they were and what they wanted to be.
If society would let me live my life as I want to live it, which is as a respectable, normal, ordinary woman, period. I don't wear mini skirts. I don't run around with my hair sticking 7 foot off my head and all the rest of the stuff that the queens do. which category that I'm classified in as being a common queen, period.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I cannot get away from it. No matter what I do, I'm put into this category. I'm labeled as this.
I was just interested in getting my hormones, getting off the streets, getting an education, fitting into society, getting married, and having a life. Quote, unquote, some kind of normal life, rather than living in the Tenderloin.
I think I lasted with my boyfriend for about 2 months. He left me for a real girl. And that really hurt me. So I came back determined that I was gonna have a sex change and have my surgery.
The transsexual path to womanhood offered some Tenderloin queens their first real hope for a brighter future, and unleashed in them an uncompromising new attitude.
The closer I came to the time for having surgery, the more risk I took.
It was illegal to dress like a woman, but nobody was gonna stop us.
The girls got together and we just decided that we're human beings. We're allowed to dress any way we want to, whether you accept it or not.
The civil rights movement fueled the Queen's newfound militancy. Glide Memorial Methodist Church, a Tenderloin institution just 2 blocks from Compton's, became a center of activism with the arrival of a charismatic young minister fresh from the front lines of racial struggle in the South.
Cecil Williams was very active in the African American community, but it was when Cecil was moved into the position of senior pastor then in the summer of '66 that things radically changed in the life of the church. Because they had this money that was from an estate, the Glide family, it gave them a certain freedom to do some experimental ministry projects. And the civil rights movement and all that was a part of that and seeking justice for people was part of the inspiration.
You may be those who've been called to take America to a new task.
At that time, there was a concern about trying to reach out to what was then sometimes referred to as the homophile community.
Pioneering homophile groups like the Daughters of Bilitis and the Mattachine Society were early advocates for gay rights. They worked with ministers at Glide to establish several innovative projects, including a night ministry that served young people living and working on the streets.
As I began working late at night, a couple of nights a week, walking in the Tenderloin, sometimes when I would walk on Market Street, wearing my clerical collar and visiting with some of the hustlers or one of the drag queens that, you know, where we would want to have a conversation, I would suggest we would go to Compton's.
Outreach to Tenderloin street youth was part of a broader effort by Glide to qualify the neighborhood for new federal funds made available through the government's War on Poverty program.
The so-called War on Poverty was created to prevent war in the streets. The question logically follows, what's the poverty program accomplishing? In San Francisco, areas like Hunters Point, the Western Addition, the Mission District, and Chinatown teem with unemployed members of minority groups. Poverty planners have mobilized some 35 programs in San Francisco. All told, they will spend more than $8.8 million this year.
You see, there were poverty programs in the Mission and in Chinatown, but there was nothing really covering the Tenderloin. And there were a lot of people in the Tenderloin that believed there should be a central city anti-poverty office.
The federal anti-poverty program was based on the assumption that minority groups were held back economically by racial prejudice. Tenderloin activists added a radical new twist, that fighting discrimination against minority sexualities should also be part of the civil rights agenda.
The vision we were working on at that point was that there are many needs in the central city that are not being addressed because the people there do not have the political voice. They're not organized. They're not speaking to each other and expressing their concerns in any kind of united voice that draws the attention of the powers that be. And so we knew that finally these people of the Tenderloin, of the central city, had to be empowered to have their own voice. And so we were getting them together, and Vanguard was one expression of that.
Vanguard was the first of a new breed of militant gay organizations to emerge from the 60s counterculture. It formed in July 1966, and most of its members were young hustlers and drag queens drawn from the streets of the Tenderloin.
Vanguard was an organization, and that's the kindest thing I can say about them. They were an organization. They came together to try to make changes.
We heard about Vanguard, but being a person of color, I didn't feel like I belonged. We just felt like, you know, it was a bunch of white radical people, and they're just doing whatever they want to do.
Some of the hustlers and the drag queens were the ones that really took charge. This was their organization. The Vanguard name that they chose, I think, reflected for them that they're on a cutting edge and that they needed to stand for something, create something that would give expression to their concerns and their dignity as human beings, and that to do that in a basically an oppressive society, in a society that said you don't have a right to exist, was in fact to be on the vanguard.
When I learned that Vanguard met at Compton's cafeteria, I finally understood the dynamics of the conflict. The management didn't like the uppity new political attitude some of its customers were starting to express, and that friction lit the fuse that led directly to the riot.
Compton's had started not welcoming these members of Vanguard, these drag queens and young gay men and others that identified with some dimension of this community.
There were a number of people in the community that raised all kinds of billy hell with Compton.
Most of it was because of harassment. We just got tired of it. We got tired of being harassed. We got tired of being made go into the men's room when we were dressed like women. We wanted our rights.
Sometimes policemen would come in and they would talk to the management, and the management said, "See those kids over there? Well, they've been here for hours and they won't buy any food."
Compton started saying, "We don't want you here," and started kicking them out. So these members of Vanguard, they felt that they were not being treated fairly, and it was a grave injustice. And so they organized and picketed Compton's to express their outrage at what was done. And of course, Compton's didn't like that.
They tried, Vanguard tried, and they didn't win. And I didn't support them that strongly, unfortunately for them. I pointed out to them at the time, picket lines very seldom do accomplish much.
Vanguard's July 18th picket to protest discrimination against drag queens and hustlers was the group's first major political action. When it failed to resolve the conflict, the stage was set for a more dramatic confrontation in the days ahead.
There were ways that we could have calmed things down a lot better than they were. There was unnecessary violence. You don't tell a policeman, "Get away from me, this is my restaurant, I have a right to be here."
The transsexuals got bolder because it was time to make a move.
We have an old expression in the police department, and that is, clubs are Trump. Well, clubs were Trump then.
They come down there to raid Compton's to begin with. That's what it was all about.
What happened then was the situation got a little bit out of hand.
The document that launched my research in the first place said the fighting started when a policeman grabbed one of the queens and she threw her coffee in his face.
Someone had thrown coffee in his face, and there was tables turned over.
Compton's erupted. People started throwing everything they could get their hands on at the police.
Oh, the sugar shakers went through the windows and the glass doors. I think I put a sugar shaker through one of those windows.
The hustlers kicked the police and punched them, and the drag queens beat them with their heavy purses. The cops retreated outside to call for backup, but cafeteria customers, maybe 60 in all, poured into the streets through the broken doors and windows and kept fighting as the paddy wagons pulled up.
All those plate glasses windows here were broken out. And of course they had the paddy wagons, and they were putting people in the paddy wagons as they would come out or start fighting.
What happened? I mean, what did people do? Did they run around out here in the street? Just like all up and down the streets?
Up and down the street that was over here.
Before it was over, a police car was destroyed, the corner newsstand was set on fire, and years of pent-up resentment boiled out into the night. It was the first known instance of collective, militant, queer resistance to police harassment in United States history.
There was a lot of joy after it happened. A lot of them went to jail, but there was a lot of, I really don't give a damn, this is what needs to happen.
These young adults just, I think, took a great delight in the fact that they could combine their efforts together to address some of their concerns and maybe together do some things that they couldn't do otherwise.
Compton started closing at midnight after the riot, and business never quite recovered. A pornography shop took its place when the restaurant folded in 1972. The transgender community moved on too in many ways. The circumstances of their lives had been forever changed by what happened that night at the corner of Turk and Taylor.
There was a big change, and I was kind of like, okay, we can dress like women all the time. We don't have to be little feminine hair fairies anymore. We can be who we are inside.
The cops just left us alone, so we just did our thing. We bought our women's clothes. We tried our clothes on in the women's store in the dressing room, which they wouldn't let us do it before. So it was just a matter of coming together.
As long as the police know that you aren't actually hooking and running the streets and so forth and so on, when they realize that we are sincere in our beliefs of going through the operation and becoming women, both physically as well as mentally, well, then they sort of leave us alone. They don't bother us. They allow us to live our lives.
Police treatment of transgender people began to change after the riot when Elliot Blackstone emerged as an unlikely advocate for transgender concerns.
Well, my job was not to make arrests. My job was to get people to understand how to live their lifestyle along with the rest of the city. I think that's very important for people. If they want to be left alone, that they have the right to be left alone. That's me. That's not the official police department line.
Elliot was a hard one for us to figure out because here he was, this police officer with police community relations in San Francisco.
I knew very, very little about sexuality except that I enjoyed sex. But other than that, I didn't know much about it. I'd never heard of transsexuals before. Read everything I could get my hands on this subject and about homosexuality. I began to understand the people a lot better.
He was a mentor, and he was instrumental in getting laws against cross-dressing changed and the like.
And anyone here after who gets up and says something nice about me, I'm going to kick him in the shin.
As part of his job with community relations, Elliot Blackstone began to coordinate a network of transgender activists and allies who came together after the riot to tackle many of the problems transgender people faced.
We got programs started for transsexuals, and then we began to get these people in contact with other community services.
We have no idea of how many people are suffering in the privacy of their homes or offices or schools because they are transsexual, because
Dr. Joel Fort pioneered innovative services for transgender people at a unit of San Francisco's public health department called the Center for Special Problems.
Treatment to these individuals at the Center for Special Problems to help them deal with the problems that they run into in the everyday course of living.
The center provided ID cards that reflected the new gender of their transsexual clients. This was especially important at a time when state-issued IDs could not be amended after a change of sex.
It was a basic ID card, and it served its purpose, although it did identify you as being under treatment for the special problem of transsexualism.
Without identification, transsexuals were undocumented workers who struggled to find legal employment. With it, they could pursue jobs available to them through the War on Poverty's training programs.
The federal government paid for my education, and I appreciated it because I got to go through the Neighborhood Youth Corps to get my education as a clerk typist and then go on to be a secretary. It made a big difference. It made me realize that I could achieve and get anything I wanted to.
In 1968, Stanford University Medical Center opened a new clinic for surgical sex reassignment, the first in the San Francisco Bay Area. Local access to transsexual surgery finally allowed many former queens to move on with their lives.
I went inside Dr. Benjamin, and Dr. Benjamin told me about the Stanford program, which was just starting at that particular point, and offered to help me get into the Stanford program. I was cute and sincere and earnest and intelligent and everything that they were looking for as their ideal candidates.
After surgery, well, I'm very fond of saying that life began more than I ever even dreamed or anticipated that it could be. I've come into my own, and I think that's the greatest reward there has been. Then I was able to go back to school as Alicia. As a woman, I was a good student. I was able to focus. I was able to blossom, to be myself.
Early transgender activism was part of a larger transformation of gender conventions that began in the 1960s. It was part of the same social upheaval that gave us unisex fashions and radical feminism, glam rock, and gay liberation. The riot at Compton's was an unsung episode in that momentous shift.
The gay movement started in the Tenderloin, basically in the 60s, when we decided to fight back. This was even pre-Stonewall. We decided to fight back because we were tired of being harassed by the police or to be used as scapegoats, as being called derelicts and degenerates. So we stuck up for gay people, and we were all one community.
These things that we were enabling and encouraging, like Vanguard, were perhaps helping to awaken that first of all, that yes, we can love ourselves and we can affirm ourselves, and yes, we have a right to exist, and we can grab hold of that and claim that. And as the healing happens in people's lives, that's when we can begin to see the larger picture.
I am so proud of those women who fought at Compton's on that hot August night back in 1966. Learning about their lives taught me lessons I never learned in graduate school about how powerful history can be. Transgender people today need to change a world that still denies us many of our basic human rights. Knowing what happened that night at Compton's brings the power of our history to bear on that struggle.
Out of Compton's came some very beautiful, beautiful women. We felt good. And that's the most interesting part of it, is because once you feel good about yourself, nobody can hurt you. Nobody can come in and turn anything around that you don't want. I don't look at my life as being tragic or having a lot of tragedy, or if I did, I just looked at it, this is just a stepping stone, keep moving. That's why, like I said, if I ever wrote a book, I would call it Wild as the Wind, because that's how I felt. The wind just would sweep you away, and you could never get caught. And you just keep flying on like you're just out there, and you're yourself.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope that everyone enjoyed the film. And now I would like to transition us to a wonderful conversation. I would like to bring up the creators of the film, and also one of the folks that is responsible for why we know about the Compton's riot today. I would like to bring on Susan Stryker and Victor Silverman. So let me just get us into a gallery view here. Wonderful. Hi. How are the two of you doing?
They're doing well, thanks.
Good. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us and joining us tonight. I just wanted to start off a really, a brief conversation. I wanted to talk with the both of you about the process of creating the film, what was going on at the time that you decided to create this, that made you decide that a documentary that would go out would be the most effective way to tell this story.
Well, it's there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, there's the specifics of this story and why this aspect of the story of trans history that we decided to focus the film on, but there's also kind of a larger set of issues. And one is that, Susan and I were both trained as historians. We met in grad school, and we love film and wanted to pursue filmmaking in a number of ways, and partly because being an academic historian, you tend to be have a small audience, so you're not able to really reach people in a big way, and film seemed like a way to really bring important information to people and in a way to restore history to the communities that had lost their own history, didn't have a sense of their history. And that was something that I think Susan and I shared going into the project. And, one night we were sitting around having a beverage and talking and said, let's make a movie. and I really wanted to make a fiction film, and we had a great plot figured out. And then Susan said, well, yeah, but I just applied for this fellowship and I've been doing this stuff on the history of the Tenderloin and trans people. And if I get this fellowship, maybe we should work on the film, a documentary. And I said, well, the Hollywood dream fading away quickly. I said, okay, sounds great. And that was the kind of the moment when the idea for this film started. The very specifics of why the film, maybe Susan can address.
Well, everything Victor said, that I had kind of, as the film shows, it's like I stumbled across a mention of the Compton's riot in the archives of the GLBT Historical Society. And, that was probably around like 1991 or 92. And, I kind of had this like, what? I've never heard of this. It's like, yeah, is it really a thing? I don't know. But, when I was working at the archives, I would just, I would go, I went through every box in the archives that, was there at the time. And I read every, periodical publication and newspaper and looked at every piece of ephemera that came in. The archives is a lot bigger now than it was, 25, 30 years ago. But, anytime I would see something about the Comptons or the Tenderloin or whatever, it's just like, I'd stick it in a folder, go like, oh, here's another piece of the puzzle. And over time, it was like, I think this thing really did happen. There's lots of little corroborating pieces of evidence that it was a thing. And so as Victor mentioned, I did apply for a Social Science Research Council grant to fund me doing research on trans history in San Francisco. And you had to have a dissemination plan for your research findings. And I very cheekily said, well, I'll make a documentary film about it, about my research. That's how I will disseminate my research. And partly it was because I just love film, like Victor was saying. I thought, it's like, I love to eat, I should learn to cook. It's like, I like to read, I should learn to write something. It's like, I love to watch film. Someday I think maybe I'll try to make a film. And when I found the Compton's story, I thought, this would be a really important story to tell to a broad audience, not just to,
write a history article about that, 200 historians would see, but to do something that was really publicly accessible. And public film, public television film was really the most publicly accessible way to tell the story at that time. It's before streaming, it's before it became so easy to make movies on your iPhone that, really was like making something to be screened free of charge on public television was the most democratically accessible form of documentary filmmaking we could find. So that's why we pitched the story that way.
Wonderful. I wanted to ask, what was the process like for creating the film? How did you track down folks who could speak to the experience of being at Compton's and being able to tell kind of some firsthand stories around it?
Well, it was a process. Susan had, as part of her research, been doing oral history interviews with a variety of people who had been in transitioning before a certain date. I can't remember what the date was. 1970, and kind of getting their stories of these pioneers down. And so we started there. We started with interviews of people that she had already talked to and knew. And then we put together a clip show, this little slide show where Susan and I did our dog and pony act, I guess. I'm not saying who was the dog and who was the pony. And we did it events around, and people would volunteer that they knew someone or that they'd heard someone, and we went through networks like that. We heard word of mouth from people, and we were able to track down people who had been in the Tenderloin in that era and were part of the scene. So it was a organic, growing process that the community helped us create.
Yeah, and I'll say too, just to piggyback on that, I had interviewed Elliot Blackstone and Ed Hansen through work at the GLBT Historical Society. I think it was Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon who introduced me to Elliot. And it's like, oh, if you want to know about the Tenderloin in the 60s, it's like, you really need to talk to Elliot Blackstone. And they gave me his phone number, and, I interviewed him 2 or 3 times. And then it was Paul Gabriel's work on the homophile community, his oral history work. He did an amazing amount of oral history work with Don Lucas and Howell Call and people who were connected with the Council on Religion and the Homosexual. And through that, I was put in touch with Ed Hansen. And we were really looking for people who had direct firsthand knowledge of what the Tenderloin was like in the 1960s. So those are the people that we prioritized in our interviewing. So, yeah.
Fantastic. We just have a little bit of time here, and we're going to go into this more in our conversation with everyone closer to the end of this event, but I wanted to ask the both of you, what, there's no more Gene Comptons. That space is, I think, currently being used to fund some private prisons. I wanted to ask, what is your hope in the work that you've done in creating this film, as well as the research that has been unveiled about Compton's? What do you think? What do you hope people will come away from it in terms of the moment that we're at right now?
Yeah. Well, I'll just jump in here. Maybe Victor can add some in just a second. But I think one of the most important things that history can do, sort of as a profession or as a practice of truth, in public, is that it's a storytelling practice that confers realness on the past. It's just like we don't remember things a lot of the times. It's just like things happen, they fall out of memory, and that what a historian can do is like tell a story that is empirically based in a way that that brings its realness back, which I think is kind of a trans thing, because that's what trans is all about too. I think it's about making your identities real. So my goal in telling that story of trans resistance to police violence, to incarceration, to gentrification, it's like as part of neighborhood organizing, as part of civil rights activism, as part of advocacy for healthcare, is to say that these issues that we deal with now have a long history, and trans people have been dealing with them for a long time. There's nothing new about this, and that we can reactivate that history of resistance. It's like, I think it is a resource to draw on, that we need to know that we have struggled and won in the past, and that in a different context, there's a famous U.S. politician who said that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and I do think that is true when you're talking about minority rights and ability to live a minoritized life. It's like there's always something that's trying to encroach on that, and we have to remember that resistance is possible. It has been successful. And that it is still needed in the Tenderloin. You just mentioned that the building that housed the old Compton's cafeteria, the SRO hotel above that, is now operated as a private for-profit incarceration facility. It is a halfway house that is leased by Geo Group, which is one of the world's largest private prison companies. It is literally a private incarceration facility masquerading as an SRO hotel or a low-income apartment building. And that, I really think that it would be a great second act for Screaming Queens to make a film and organize a project around trying to, get jails out of our neighborhoods and to turn that space into something that actually provides low-income housing, social services, cultural amenities, job training programs for people who actually live and work in the Tenderloin right now.
Wonderful. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, that the film succeeded beyond our wildest expectations in accomplishing just what Susan was talking about, hoping that it would do what we had hoped it would do, in the sense that it helped people in the trans community and recognize their own history, and it helped people in the wider queer community and the wider society as a whole to recognize this long history of dignity, of human lives, of the fight for justice that people had gone through in order to create the world that we now have. And that accomplishment put the Compton's Cafeteria Riot on the map. No, it hadn't been heard of before. And that, in a way, it was a process of myth making, not in the sense that it's false, but in the sense that it helps us understand our world. It's a story that we are able to tell each other, and that we were able to tell the wider society, that helps us understand why our world is the way it is, that people can fight, as Susan put it, that people can resist, and that those challenges that we face now are the same ones that the Queens in the Tenderloin faced in the 60s. And it's a somewhat different situation now, but it's definitely connected. And that if our film is able to continue to inform that spirit and help people have a vision of what they can accomplish, that's a really fabulous result for that project. And I'm so glad that all those years ago, Susan and I had that drink and said, yeah, let's make a movie.
I would really love to continue this conversation and come back around. We're going to bring you, Susan, and Victor back into the conversation in a little bit. And I'm seeing some really wonderful questions coming through to our question and answer section. We will do our best to answer those via text, but what I would love to do now is a short screening of a little KQED segment about Compton's Cafeteria Riot, the play, that Katie was mentioning a little bit earlier at the top of this program, and then we're going to have a conversation about the play, moderated by Katie, talking to Shane Zaldivar and Donna Persona. So give me one moment and I'll switch that over.
For a trace of mascara on the wrong night, they would beat you, bust you up in the most despicable way.
You know, your buttons are on the wrong side, pal. Come here. You're under arrest for female impersonate.
No, don't, no.
Yeah.
No.
In the 60s in San Francisco, anything that had to do with gay was a secret. It was almost like literally entering another world. Those transgender women were beautiful people. They took care of me. And I'm making it a mission to have the world see them through my eyes.
You know, it's the 60s, this is a new time, I can't believe, what they're challenging, what they're saying. There's very few facts about what exactly happened that night. What facts there are, we put into the play. The rest of it really is stories about Colette and Donna and their experiences.
I was humiliated, but it happens to all the girls.
Everybody'd go to Compton's and sit for 3 or 4 hours and just have coffee and talk, and it was the only safe place around where everybody could be around each other, you know what I mean? Yeah, because the streets were no good, and the police would be on everybody.
I was about 18 years old when I discovered Compton's Cafeteria. It was the most exciting thing up to that point in my life. I saw boys standing with boys, just everything I dreamed about. Wow, I loved it.
I first got to know Donna as a performer. We met backstage and I saw her do her thing. I was blown away. Like, this woman is of her age and she's having the time of her life.
Lovely.
I can't wait for you to see my mom.
Yeah.
She told me about the story. I read the script. And then she got very personal with me about her experiences. Growing up in San Jose, being in the closet. Let's see.
Let's see if the slipper fits.
When I moved to the Bay, I really did not know much about transgender. I pretty much was a gay guy. I did drag a few times in college. The reality is I have it easier now than it would have been back then in many ways. She was always scared that she'd get caught. So she was always filled with a bit of anxiety. Hearing it from Donna's perspective just gave me a whole other sense of respect for Donna and for the story. She's my elder. She's lived this experience.
What happened? So get it out. No use holding on to it.
I was at the cat club. Some guy hit on me. I came back to my drink and he was still there. I think he put something in it because I got very dizzy. He said he would help me, and the next thing I know, I'm at his hotel. And I screamed, telling him no. I told him that this doesn't feel good, stop. As soon as I was able to get out, I went to the police station. I told them what happened, and you know what they did? They laughed. They said I was a man and I couldn't get raped.
And the sad thing is that I believe them. I've had some sleepless nights. It's almost like going through it again for me. And that's not so easy.
This is a group of people fighting for their rights as human beings. And they're still doing that fight today.
Tonight is our opening night. The folks that have made this history, we're doing this for them.
I was at the cat club the other night. Some guy hit on me. He was handsome, older, but then he got a little weird. So I went to the dance.
I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to go through it again and again because I believe, unfortunately, most of them died not fully understanding what they'd hoped, that they were just normal, good people. I know that now, even if they don't know about it, we're giving them validation.
Hello.
Hi there.
So for those of you just joining us, that was a short by KQED about the Tenderloin Museum's play, The Compton's Cafeteria Riot, which was written by Mark Nasser, Donna Persona, and Colette Legrand, and was produced in 2018. We plan to restage it this summer, and that did not happen for very obvious reasons. But we remain very dedicated to the project, and we hope we can invite you back to experience the play next year. So, Donna, I think that you're muted. But there we go. Hello. So Donna, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experiences in the Tenderloin in the 60s and with Compton's Cafeteria.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yes, okay, well, I was living in San Jose at the time, and I was living with my parents and my family. We were a Mexican family, and my father was a Baptist minister, and fortunately for me, my family loves me, and they adored me then, they adore me now, and I didn't want to perpetrate anything in San Jose. I was living, as I said before in that little clip, I was having secrets. I had secrets all to myself. And back then, there was nothing, no community for me at all. And there was no anything that looked like what I wanted to be a part of. So I got a hint, the idea that if I came to San Francisco, actually, this is a funny story, my father would substitute preach in San Francisco when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. And I remember seeing one Sunday in San Francisco, someone that looked like a guy walking across the street, and his eyebrows were shaved off. And I thought, that means something. I'm going to come back to this town someday. So,
he was Mr. White Rabbit.
yes, yes. It was a message to me that came through. But so a little later on, I got on a Greyhound bus and I came to San Francisco, and I couldn't go to bars, so I was too young. So I just walked around, and happily for me, I happened upon Compton's Cafeteria. And, from a block away or across the street, I saw these beautiful women who were a little bit overdressed. They were glamorous in the Tenderloin, okay? And actually, that's the first time that I ever was fooled, as you want to say that. I really thought they were women. And so I gravitated toward them, and I went into Compton's with them. And I started to hang out with them. I got to know them too, and I found out that they were born biologically they were men. But for me, and Amanda in the film Screaming Queen says it, I was in a wonderland. I came to a place, and it as everyone knows, it had all the bad elements, quote unquote, gambling, drug doing and dealing, and theft and prostitution, all manner of criminality. But to me, it was Disneyland, the happiest place in the world, because I could relax my shoulders and there was nothing bad energy coming to me. And I really felt like this is kind of home for me. So yes, it was, although it had all those dangerous elements, it was just the most thrilling, beautiful fantasy lives that I can imagine. And I saw these women and gay hustlers and things, and I learned from them that they became a family unto themselves with each other. And they really took care of each other, and they came to take care of me. And I want to share this one little image that was in the Tenderloin. Some of the girls, I would follow them. I went with them to their home, a hotel, and there was 5 or 6 of them that would pay the rent, and they would have shifts on who could have the bed, 2 of them at a time at different times. And this image that will never, ever leave my mind is the basin to wash your face. And at that time, there was no cabinet. It was just this basin there out of nowhere on the wall. And it was filled with dirty makeup. I love that. So, the girls would make themselves glamorous and beautiful.
Yeah.
So those are some of my memories, and the whole place, many blocks there, there was all kinds of excitement going on, and yes, it was beautiful to me. Yes.
So Shane, how did you become involved with the play, and just talk a bit about your experiences with the play and with your relationship with Donna?
So I moved to San Francisco back in the beginning of 2014. I had moved from Florida, and those first few years kind of just being in San Francisco were a roller coaster, just trying to learn about myself, learn how to navigate. But a little bit of that Wonderland feeling came over me too, right? There's drag queens that are around and are accessible. There's glitter on these streets and all these different things. And eventually, once I started getting into drag, I had met Donna back in, I forget the year, but I remember the venue. It was Balancoire for Ain't Your Mama's Drag Show back in the day.
Cruise and Duluth show.
Yes, it was a wonderful show. It was 8 p.m. It was all ages. I'm about it. But that was the first time I met Donna, and we were backstage, and it was very cordial when we connected, but after seeing her perform, I was kind of blown away. Like I said, wow, this is somebody that is living their life, and We connected after, and I remember Donna kind of like tapping my shoulder, maybe the second time around that we saw each other, and was like, hey, there's this thing I'm doing that I want to talk to you about. I can't talk to you about it now, and I can't really tell you more about it, but I'll tell you later. And this, it was so mysterious. And after that moment, we still kind of kept running into each other in different venues and stuff. And I always knew, oh, there's this thing. And eventually I learned that this is the play that she's been writing with Mark Nasser and Colette Grand. She's been meeting every week. So then once the play started to get rolling, they're like, okay, this is the thing I wanted to talk to you about. There's this play. So eventually I met Mark, got to learn a bit more about the script, and was just really blown away. Like, this is a piece of history I didn't really know about. And at that point, what was even better was then Donna started to kind of reveal more of the stories that had happened to her during this time. And that for me was really exciting on top of the project. And that's kind of how I got to learn more about the Compton's Cafeteria Riot and the play.
Nice. A question for both of you. What does the play mean to you, and why do you feel like it's relevant for 2020?
Okay, well, I'll start. The story to me means that it's a community that I most connect with. When I was going there, what I described before, I didn't know that was something that was going to be in my future. I didn't know that, so they kind of showed me like this is something you might be for you, something that might be for you. But I want to say that I went away from them. I left them, and this was before the riot. And I did it because being with them, I saw that they were restricted to sex work. That's what they did, and I had other things in mind for myself. I wanted an education. I wanted a career, and I learned from them that all of that was impossible. So I suppressed anything like that, and also I didn't want to disappoint my family or introduce them to anything like that. So it's meaningful to me because that's the group that is my family, the closest part of my family, and I didn't join them then, but I'm joining them now. And I see that some of them, you met some of them seeing the film, but most of them didn't survive that. And, they just wanted to be normal. They wanted to be a housewife, a secretary, have 2 kids, and have a life. They didn't want to be bank robbers or murderers. So I'm happy about bringing this story out to show the ones coming along now that everything is possible for them. And yes, they are valid and they are normal. And I think it's relevant now because in different areas, we're seeing the exact same things being taken away from people or not permitted. Separation with ICE and immigration, there's separation from family, police brutality now and back then, and discrimination for race. All of the things that have raised their ugly head now were going on then. So it's the same struggles now. So that to me makes it relevant and relevant.
Shane?
Yeah, the play for me means so many different things. Like, I think one thing is the experience of the play overall. I've watched the documentary that Susan Stryker and Victor Silverman did so many times. And I've done more research on the history, but this play in particular, it puts people in the dining booth and it creates an experience that's really immersive. And I think history telling in a way that puts you there is really groundbreaking in some ways. I haven't been to too many experiences that put you in such a time capsule. And I really enjoyed that experience, particularly with the play, because you were seeing this experience kind of take place all around you. You were interacting with characters. You weren't just watching a show from a seat. You were in the scenario, feeling some of the fears that these characters have. That's one thing that the play does that I think is so amazing and meaningful to me as a project. Like, I feel the impact of that is really important. But yes, as well as some of the things Donna said, like these, and that we hear in this topic, is that these things are still happening today to our community. Our community, the transgender and gender nonconforming community, is constantly being oppressed, and the statistics do not look good for the community at all. And those statistics come from lived experiences. These are people who are being incarcerated because of the way they present themselves, because we teach the institutional and, you know, the powers that be that hold guns and hold these powers of violence that we are a threat. They think this way. You know, there's not a lot of education around that. And then the decision making that comes up down doesn't end up good for us. You know, we don't have access to education because at that point we're told we're not normal enough or good enough. We don't have access to jobs because we're discriminated against, and only this year were changes made to make that in law. When we have access to homes, like having shelter, so many times the community has been thrown out and then they have to find a place to be. So there's just so much working against us already. And that was the story back then. And then this is where we are now. You know, there's so many things that tie in that tell me this is a fight that still needs to be fought. And I think the play was something that really personally made me recognize that, like, I want to be a part of this fight somehow. I want to be a part of telling this story. And I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of my full cast, but what inspires me from the cast is there's so many people there who are similarly passionate about making inclusive spaces, talking about these things outside of the play. You know, so the project itself has been really inspiring as a project, and also the effect of what it can do addressing kind of these inequities that have existed for so long.
Yeah, when Mike Seeley approached me about KQED doing a piece, like, I felt like the relationship between like the older generation of the writers and the younger generation of the cast was like one of the more interesting things about the story, or our story of the production. So I really pointed him in the direction to focusing on the two of you, because I think the younger generation learning from the queer elders is such an important part of the experience of the play, and that's like really represented in your relationship. So thank you so much. We're all going to have a conversation together now. Welcome back to the program.
Yes.
Other panelists.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Thank you so much for facilitating that conversation, Katie. And I think what Shane and Donna were just talking about is a really great launch point into everyone in this program having a conversation around how is it that we use history in the present? How do we use Compton's and what happened there, and it being this first uprising of queer militant response to police brutality, to inform and mobilize what is going on right now? We're in a very specific moment that is also all too familiar. And how do we work to prioritize the experiences of trans folks, and especially trans folks of color, at a moment where there's a large reckoning against violence against the community perpetrated by police. So we're going to open this up to all of our wonderful speakers to have this kind of conversation until we round out the end of our program.
Susan, come back.
I am, oh no, there we go. I tried to start my video, but the host was denying me.
Apologies.
Now I've been granted permission. All right.
You have to stay on the right side of the host.
That's right. Right.
And Donna, you are muted again.
Oh no, here, let's unmute her.
Okay, great.
Technology is hard, folks.
Yeah, we're all learning, even though we've been doing it for 4 or 5 months now. It's 6 months, whatever it is, forever. Yeah.
So yeah, I think whoever wants to jump in to first start. I know, Susan, when I was originally talking with you about this event, when we were first brainstorming it, you had brought up your recent Medium article at the crossroads of Turk and Taylor, and specifically focusing on the for-profit prison connection. I wondered if you wanted to speak a little to that, and especially, you know, Donna, what you were saying about ICE and families being separated. I think there's a lot here that we can spend the rest of this time together to talk about.
Well, I mean, thank you for the invitation, Lee. You know, I feel like I kind of got that off my chest, you know, with the Q&A earlier. But yeah, I'll go quickly, like, find the link to that Medium article that I wrote and put it into the chat so people can see it there. But back in June, some friends and colleagues and comrades of mine, we were thinking that we were going to have bad news from the Supreme Court about trans rights and healthcare access and all of that. And we thought that we would organize a protest the day that the decision was going to come down. And it turned, so where we would march from the courthouse, the federal courthouse on, not Polk, Golden Gate, to Compton. It's called Courthouse to Compton's. And it turns out that it was, you know, it was good news, you know, from the Supreme Court. And so that part was more of a celebration, but we were trying to link the idea of the oppression that trans people face now with the oppression that, you know, Black people have, you know, experienced in this country since 1619, and the Black Lives Matters movements, the defund the police movement, you know, the abolitionist movement, and that we thought that calling attention to the history of trans resistance at Compton's and linking that to efforts to get the GEO group's private, you know, halfway house, you know, out of the building at Turk and Taylor would just be a great kind of public event to do. So we got about, I think it was about 1,200 people to show up, all masked and as distanced as possible and hand sanitized to protest in the streets and tell, you know, to try to link through history, legacies of resistance with the ongoing need for resistance against the structural violence that so many of us and, you know, differently marginalized and minoritized communities face. There's an Instagram page, Courthouse of Compton's, where you can go and see some of the protest footage. We pulled together a coalition of about 40 different groups who helped sponsor it. Tenderloin Museum helped sponsor it. GLBT Historical Society helped sponsor, but a lot of activist organizations as well, and the transgender district of the city of San Francisco also participated. Quickly, there was another event that we linked the protest at Compton's too, which was a a national arts action called In Plain Sight, where we got skywriters, up in airplanes to write messages over detention facilities coast to coast, about sort of calling attention to the connections between, ICE, immigration detention, family separation, larger questions about incarceration, abolitionism, police violence. So if you go to if you look up In Plain Sight, you will find another really cool project there with one of the participating artists, me, linking that activism to the legacy of resistance at Compton's. Okay, that's all I got to say. Done. Out.
Well, there was a question in the questions about what given I'm not sure, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Liminal Lisa, but wondering why, given the prominence of police violence against queer people, the role of churches in repressing demanding gender and sexual conformity in society and enforcing it, why we chose to feature Ed Hansen, and Elliot Blackstone in the film, a priest and a cop, through the big, the state and the church, right? And I think that connects to the point that Susan was making, that whenever there's moments of liberation or moments of people moving forward and asserting themselves and making the world a better place for them to be able to live full and healthy and happy lives, there's reaction and repression. And all too often it's the state institutions, these big institutions, which carry it through, which do that. That's why we have these big institutions of prisons. That's why we have massive police forces and military forces and so on. Those repressive apparatus are everywhere connected to the moments of liberation. They're trying to stop it. But one of the ways that liberation really happened was that there were these people within those institutions who were trying to turn them into something different. That's what happened at Glide. That's what Elliot was trying to do with the San Francisco Police Department. They're not always successful, as we saw from the what happened with Elliot's career. But those people need to be celebrated and remembered because they help make those changes. And having that kind of coalition is what can really move things forward. There has to be the kind of demonstration and mass action, but there have to be people who are going to respond.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. And to piggyback on it, it's like, I think the question of the church is really complicated because the church hasn't always been simply repressive. I mean, I'm not a Christian, it's just like that's not my jam, but it's just like historically, particularly the African-American church has been, at the forefront of the civil rights movement. It's like Martin Luther King, right? And that this was what we saw at Glide, that you had a progressive faction of the Methodist Church who wanted to turn Glide into a model for, urban social justice ministry. They brought in Cecil Williams, who, as we said in the film, came from like the front lines of the racial struggle in the South. He was had been with the NAACP. He was one of the organizers of the lunch counter protests all across the South. And their idea, when they brought Cecil in to Glide, was that the social justice activism would revolve around race, and particularly about African American issues. But what they found out when these activists showed up in the Tenderloin is that the Tenderloin was at that time a largely white neighborhood, and that a lot of the oppression was about gender and sexuality. And it's like they took the lead, actually, Glide did, in like bringing homosexual, as it was called then, and transsexual issues into the mix of civil rights organizing. And so Glide, played a really prominent role in progressive, I would even say radical social change activism in the Tenderloin. And it brought the moral authority of the church to bear on those questions. It basically was saying gay and trans are good. Elliot's a more complicated question because it's like, I got to know him a little bit over the years, and I genuinely think Elliot was a really nice guy. The more subtle point that I hope the film makes, as Victor was pointing out, it's like Elliot's career was savaged because he helped gay and trans people. And that what the message in that for me is that I really don't think the police force as an institution is reformable. It's like, I think it is an instrument of oppression. You could try to be a liberal reformer within it, and it's just like, it doesn't get you anything except fired and set up. And so, I think the lesson I take from Elliot's story is that it's not enough to be like a good cop. It's like, you have to change the way that policing happens so that public safety actually happens for the public. And that includes, trans people and people of color.
Yeah, I'd really like to hear from Donna and Shane, especially since you're coming at this as folks who are in the play and were able to have an immersive experience in telling these stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to say one thing. When we're talking about the relevance of the story today, in our story and in the film, you see that people were taken to jail for wearing clothes that had the buttons on the wrong side. They were taken to jail because of the clothes they wore. Or the length of their hair. So right now we're seeing a move to reform the prison system, and from seeing our play, you see that it's ridiculous things that they put people in prison for sometimes, and so that needs to be looked at. Why are prisoners in prison, and do they need to be there, and is there an underlying thing? And it's the to keep people, to put them in their place, keep them in their place, and to keep the powers where someone thinks they should be. So I'm really happy that our play speaks to that, and that is very relevant today, and that's a move that needs to be brought to the forefront. And I'm happy that here in San Francisco, it seems like we're moving in the right direction and getting people out of prison. Yeah, I wanted to say that.
Yeah, I'll say one thing that the play kind of inspired me, and some of the history too. I remember a sign that was in some of the photos of the play, or of the riot, and there's like a woman who says like, drag it out on the streets. And that was something I was doing a little bit before this moment we're in now, where I had a protest project, I guess you can call it, where it's called the Pop-Up Drag Queen, and I was doing this in the public face. And for me, it was kind of inspiring to just kind of combine, like, okay, this is something we have to constantly do, right? Like, put ourselves in spaces because we're here. And that project was helpful in trying to make people see, like, okay, we're not a threat, we're just people, we're just dancing in the street, or it's not. That project helped me to like face people and be like, I'm not as threatening as you might think. But in this moment that we're in now, I think applying some of that, right, like trying to be loud, trying to be creative, even though we're under these certain restrictions, but we're seeing more of how this institutional violence is hurting us. And it comes from such a system where it's one decision at the top, and then the next person says, oh, they told me to do this, I'm following the law. Oh, they told me to do this, I'm following the law. And then it leads to our you know, the lived experience that we have, where trans people and trans people of color, Black lives are considered threats, you know, and that's done institutionally. So how do we listen to people so we can hear more of those stories and be allies and keep letting people know that this is wrong? Like, for me, it's inspired me to have more individual conversations. Like, I have family in Florida where I moved from, where they're very much Trump supporters. And I feel in this moment inspired to talk to them and be like, I need you to know how this impacts my life. If you say you love me or if we're family, it might not do much. There's so many people in our community where that doesn't really do much, you know, that's blood is not as thick as they might think, you know, but that's one thing it's inspired me to do, is to at least try to have conversations, because we're in a moment where I feel like I need to at least try. I've heard stories, and that's what history does. Like, there's history like Compton's, or there's history like the Holocaust, which is extreme, but, you know, I see similarities in some of the institutionalized instruction. Oh, do this. This person belongs here. This is how you treat this person. And for me, it's inspired me to just have conversations now about, like, okay, this is why your vote matters. This is how that little check on this name impacts so many lives. So that's one thing I'm trying to do now under these restrictions. But the play itself has kind of inspired me to keep it going as I can, because I really do think that that experience and that story is something people can relate to with the characters and the storytelling that's done with this incredible history. And I do thank, you know, again, Victor Silverman and Susan Stryker for putting together that piece of work, because it's something that I look to if I ever feel in question, like, what did these people go through? Like, and same with Donna. Donna is somebody I call and talk to, and, you know, we shoot the shit. And, you know, I learn a lot that way too. So I'm really thankful to have these kind of experiences and resources to help motivate me to keep the fight going, because we gotta keep going.
Well, I think that is a wonderful place for us to close. I know that I personally would love to continue talking about this all into the night. And I'm sure that everyone has even more things to say, but unfortunately we are coming to the end of our time together. I want to thank everybody who has lent 2 hours of their time tonight to tell their stories and to showcase their work. I want to thank Katie and the Tenderloin Museum for partnering with us on this program. I'm really hoping that we can do more of these. And like I said at the top, if you're not already a member of the GLBT Historical Society, or also conversely with, well, not conversely, together with the Tenderloin Museum, you should go to our respective websites and join. Nonprofit organizations are struggling right now, especially museums. And I hope that you all have a wonderful evening, and be safe and have a lovely week. And I hope to work with all the rest of you in the future.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.